we gain experience in translating between English and first-order logic. There it was done informally to get a feeling for what statements of first-order logic mean. Here we will do the same thing in a more carefully controlled way, to define what statements of the first lexicon mean. Later on, we will investigate the meaning of other types of speech shocks besides sentences. Before moving on to natural languages, we will consider the semantics of formal languages. It is easy to deal with meanings of expressions like x plus k in arithmetic or xay in logic because they have a compositional semantics. This means that the semantics of any phrase is a function of the semantics of its subphrases. It does not depend on any other phrase before, after, or encompassing the given phrase. So if we know the meaning of x and y, then we know the meaning of the whole phrase. At first glance, natural languages appear to have a non-compositional semantics. In the batter hit the ball, we expect the semantic interpretation of batter to be one who swings a bat, and of the ball to be spherical sporting equipment. But in the chef mix the batter to be served at the ball, we expect the two words to have different meanings. This suggests that meaning of the batter and ball depend non-compositionally on the surrounding context. However, these semantic interpretations are only the expected preferred ones, not the only possible ones. It is possible that the batter hit the ball refers to a cake mixture making a grand appearance at a formal dance. If you work hard enough, you can invent a story where that is preferred reading. In short, semantic interpretation alone cannot be certain of right interpretation of a phrase or sentence. So we divide the work. Semantic interpretation is responsible for combining meanings compositionally to get a set of possible interpretations, and disambiguation is responsible for choosing the best one. So we saw how augmentations could be used to specify the semantics of numbers and digits. In fact, it is not difficult to use the same idea to specify the semantics of the complete language of arithmetic, as we do in the figure. It shows the parse tree for 3 plus 4 divided by 2. According to this grammar, with the semantic augmentations, the string is analyzed as x5, an expression whose semantic interpretation is 5. We are now ready to write a semantics for a very small subset of English. As usual, the first step is to determine what the facts are, what semantic representations we want to associate with what phrases. We will look at the simple sentence John loves Mary and associate with it semantic interpretation loves John Mary. It is trivial to see which parts of the semantic interpretation come from which words in the sentence. The rule tells us that the semantic interpretation of John loves Mary is which is equivalent to loves John Mary. The rest of the semantic follows in a straightforward way from the choices we have made so far. Because the VPs are represented as predicates, it is a good idea to be consistent and represent verbs as predicate as well. The verb love is presented as yx loves xy. The predicate that when given an argument such as Mary returns the predicate x loves x Mary. The complicated part is deciding how the parts fit together, particularly for intermediate phrases such as the VP loves Mary. Note that the semantic interpretation of this phrase is neither a logical term nor a complete logical sentence. Intuitively, loves Mary is a description that may or may not apply to a particular person. In this case, it applies to John. This means that loves Mary is a predicate that when combined with a term that represents a person, the person doing the loving, yields a complete logical sentence. Using the A notation as we used in the previous chapter, we can represent loves Mary as the predicate. So the VP to verb NP rules applies the predicate that is semantic interpretation of the verb to the object that is the semantic interpretation of the NP to get the semantic interpretation of the whole VP. We end up with the grammar and the parse tree above. We had no problem with John loves Mary, but things get more complicated when we consider all of E1. Immediately we are faced with all the choices of previous chapter for semantic representation, for example. How do we represent time, events, and substances? Our first choice will be to use the event calculus notation of the next session. In this notation, the sentence, "Every agent smells a wumpus," can be expressed as can be seen in the slide. We could have used a smell predicate instead of perceive, but we wanted to be able to emphasize the similarities between smelling, hearing, feeling, touching, and seeing. Our task is to build up our desired representation from the constituents of the sentence. We first break the sentence into NP and VP phrases, to which we can assign the following semantics as could be seen in the next slide. Right away, there are two problems. First, the semantics of the entire sentence appears to be semantics of the NP, with the semantics of the VP filling the part. That means that we cannot form the semantics of the sentence with real, we could do it with object, which seems a little odd, at least at the first glance. The second problem is that we need to get variable a as an argument to the relation perceived. In other words, the semantics of the sentence is formed by plugging the semantics of the VP to the right argument slot of the NP, while also plugging the variable a from the NP to the right argument slot of the semantics of the VP. It looks as if we need two functional compositions on premises to be rather confusing. The complexity stems from the fact that the semantic structure is very different from the syntactic structure. To avoid this confusion, many modern grammars take a different tack. You define an intermediate form to mediate between syntax and semantics. The intermediate form has two key properties. First, it is structurally similar to the syntax of the sentence, and thus can be easily constructed through composition means. Second, it contains enough information so that it can be translated into regular first-order logic sentence. Because it sits between the syntactic and logical forms, it is sometimes called a quasi-logical form. In this chapter, we will use a quasi-logical form that includes all of first-order logic and is augmented by lambda, expression, and one new construction, which we will call a quantified term. By following the established steps, we could arrive at a grammar as can be seen in the slide. To actually use the grammar, we would augment it further with the case and subcategorization information that we worked on previously. There is no difficulty in combining such things with semantics, but the grammar is easier. We would augment it further with the case and subcategorization information that we worked out previously. There is no difficulty in combining such things with semantics, but the grammar is easier to understand when we look at one type of augmentation at a time. The final step of semantic interpretation is to convert the quasi-logical form into real first-order logic. For a quasi-logical form, that means turning quantified terms into real terms. This is done by a simple rule. For each quantified term within a quasi-logical form QLF, replace the quantified term with x and replace QLF with the term QX, PX, OP, and QLF, where OP is when Q is V and is A when Q is E or E. For example, the sentence, "Every dog has a day," has the quasi-logical form as shown in the slide. We do not specify which of the two quantified terms get pulled at first, so there are actually two possible interpretations. The first one says that each dog has its own day, while the second says there's a special day all the dog shares. Choosing between them is the job for disambiguation. Often the left to right order of the quantified term matches the left to right order of the quantifiers. But other factors come into play. The advantage of quasi-logical form is that it subsequently represents all the possibilities. The disadvantage is that it doesn't help you choose between them. For that, we need the full power of disambiguation using all sorts of evidence. We have shown how an agent can perceive a string of words and use a grammar to derive a set of possible semantic interpretations. Now we address the problem of completing the interpretation by adding information about the current situation. Information that is non-compositional and context-dependent. So through semantic interpretation, an agent can perceive a string of words and use a grammar to derive a set of possible semantic interpretations. Now we address the problems of completing the interpretation by adding information about the current situation. Information which is non-compositional and so the most obvious need for fragment information is in resolving of endexals, which are phrases that refer directly to the current situation. For example, in the sentence, "I am in Boston today." The interpretation of indexals I and today depend on who uttered the sentence when. We represent indexals by column constants such as speaker, which are interpreted as fluents. The hearer who perceives a speech act should also perceive who the speaker is and use this information to resolve the index. Another important concern is anaphora, the occurrence of phrases referring to objects that have been mentioned previously. Only read consider the passage John was hungry, he entered the restaurant to understand that he, and the second sentence refers to John. We need to practice the first sentence and use it as part of the situational knowledge in interpreting the second sentence. Anaphoric reference can also be made with definite noun phrases like the man. In fact, the pattern of reference can be rather complicated, requiring a thorough understanding of the discourse. During the following sentence, after John proposed to Marcia, they found a preacher and got married for the honeymoon. They went to Hawaii. Here, the definite noun phrases the honeymoon refers to something that was only implicitly alluded by the verb married. The pronoun they refers to a group that was not explicitly mentioned before. John and Marcia, but not a preacher, when pronouns are used to refer to things when the same sentence, we at least get some help from syntax. For example, in he saw him in the mirror, the two pronouns must refer to different people, whereas in he who saw himself they refer to the same person, but most of the time there are no strict rules on anaphoric reference, so deciding which reference is the right one is a part of this ambiguation. Although the disambiguation is certainly guided by pragmatic or context-dependent information. So that is all for my presentation.